A wise opponent is more dangerous than an idiot who believes they are wise. That is their own downfall. They didn't see this coming. The chosen ones. They were too busy telling falsehoods, laying traps, and believing they were 2 steps ahead, not comprehending you had seen through every move before they made it. They assumed they were playing a game of control. However, they never won the real game. The moment of truth has arrived. The moment their facade crumbles, and they see you standing there undisturbed, unafraid, and aware of all they've tried to conceal. The power of being selected is more than just what you know. It's about their fears. Your presence alone dispels their delusions. Your silence pushes them to reconsider their own plans. They constructed their whole strategy around deceit, manipulation, and control, believing they had you trapped. But this is the reality. The truth is a force they failed to account for. And now it's staring them in the face, forcing them to confront a truth they'd worked so hard to avoid. They wanted to believe they were untouchable, that they could manipulate you with tactics and mental games. However, those who rely on deceit are always the most vulnerable because once their falsehoods stop working, they have nothing left. And now they stand exposed, struggling to hide their mistakes, the smirks they once wore gone. The false confidence broke the illusion that they had influence over you. You are more than simply a piece on their board. You are the board itself. While they were engaged playing checkers, you had already mastered it. They had no idea they were in, and this is what haunts them the most. The conclusion that every action they made was predictable and that no secret was truly hidden. That the control they believed they had was really an illusion. So let them bear the consequences of their own ignorance. Allow them to grapple with the paranoia of knowing you've seen through it all. Allow them to question every encounter, phrase, and situation, because they no longer only dread being exposed. They dread you and your existence here as the one who sees through the illusions, the one they underestimated, is no coincidence. Whether you're new to this space or have been with us for a while, know this. Your awareness is your strength, which they dread. If you're ready to accept what makes you unique and claim the truth that shocks them to their core, then press the like button, subscribe, and leave a 77 in the comments. Let them ponder. Allow them to experience the weight of knowing you are always ahead. And now, let us break it down step by step, because if you are truly one of the chosen, you will not simply listen. You will feel compelled to stay until the very end. Well, we begin. First and foremost, they had the illusion of control. The reality was always yours. Let a fool feel they are winning, and they will dig their own grave with pride. They strutted around as if they owned the board, certain they had you surrounded. They thought every action they made was their own, unaware that you had previously planned their whole journey. Long before they ever contemplated their first, you offered them nothing but quiet, a nod, and maybe a grin, allowing them to revel in their sense of dominance. They fell for it every time. What makes it so satisfying? The chosen one is that they had no idea you were watching and waiting for them, knowing all along that they were performers in a play you had planned. Their hubris rendered them blind. They believed they were playing chess, but in reality, they were wandering through a maze you created, following a path you devised that led directly to their own demise. And now the reality has struck them like a freight train. The revelation burns because they were not simply outplayed. They never played to begin with. They felt they had the upper hand, but what do they see now? It was a leash you let them hold, only to see them tangle themselves in knots. Why did you allow them to think they were winning? Because nothing reveals a person's flaws more than false confidence. When they assume they are invincible, they get sloppy. They disclose all. Their thoughts, movements, and fears. And you were paying attentively. They intended to influence, control, and draw you into their game. However, you refused to play by their rules. Every insult, every little power move, every phony grin. They flung everything at you. I was convinced it worked. Meanwhile, you stood still, watching them stumble over their own fantasies. They're already reeling. The arrogant expressions have disappeared. They previously felt satisfied, but now it feels like sand sliding through their fingers. They are left with questions. How much did you know? When did you figure it out? And what is the answer? Always. Their biggest error was presuming you were unaware. They assumed you were responding, but you were always calculating. They assumed you were playing along, but you were actually waiting. And now, as they sit in the ruins of their so-called schemes, they must confront the truth. They never had control. They just didn't realize it yet. Number 2, they assumed they were traveling in shadows. But you saw through each move. A liar's worst flaw is not their lie. They leave behind fissures. They moved as if they were invisible, chatting in nooks and exchanging looks, weaving their web of deception with the assurance of someone who honestly thought they were out of sight. They mistaken their own arrogance for expertise, believing that their small gimmicks and well-placed phrases would keep you in the dark. But they had no idea you were watching the entire time. They believed they were slick, that their motions, perfectly practiced grins, and abrupt silences went undetected. However, dishonesty always leaves fingerprints. A tense twitch, a forced laugh, a shift in their tone at the wrong time. The manner they attempted to act, too typical and too casual, as if they weren't concealing anything. They misjudged your ability to read between the lines and notice subtleties that they assumed were invisible. And now, the walls are closing in. The illusory sense of security they previously enjoyed has vanished. The panic began when they knew you were on to them from the start. Now, they're scurrying to figure out how much you know, trying to retrace their own movements, seeking for the exact instant they slipped. But it doesn't matter. They slipped from the start. They made everything too simple, predictable, and clear. They felt they were leading the game. They literally left a trail for you to follow. Their confidence blinded them. And you merely waited. You led them to feel their game was immaculate. Allow them to go further into their own delusion until truth hits them like a rock wall. Now paranoia sets in. They look at you differently. They hesitate to speak. They go over every exchange, wondering what information they gave out. How much did you see? How much you understand? The worst part, they cannot reverse it. Because when someone discovers they were never in control, they lose everything. Let them feel it, the chosen one. Allow them to grapple with their own idiocy. Because, in the end, their greatest error was not the lies they told. It was believing that they could ever conceal the truth from you. Number 3, you recognize their flaws while keeping your own hidden. A predator that does not realize it is being observed is already prey. They felt they were observing you and scrutinizing your every action, waiting for the crack to form. They wanted to identify your vulnerability, something, whatever they can use to get under your skin, to control the story, to make you question yourself. But here's what they didn't realize. You were never the one under the microscope. They were. You kept an eye on them while they schemed. While they tried your patience, you saw their patterns. Every insult, every planned silence, every false sense of assurance. They believed they were gaining progress, but all they were doing was disclosing more about themselves to you. The irony. They imagined you were oblivious to their games, but it was their own blindness that cost them. You understood their every flaw before they even realized they had them. Their anxieties were not veiled. You saw them in their demand for control, in how they projected their worries onto others, and in their attempt to conceal doubt with arrogance. They were not observing you. They were gradually revealing themselves without realizing it. And now it is seeping in. They feel naked, vulnerable, and helpless. The fact that you've known all along that you were never duped is eating them alive. They spent so much time attempting to influence you. After putting in so much effort to create a false sense of superiority, they discovered that they had been read like an open book. They intended to shatter you, but instead they cracked. They desired to control you. But now they're the ones swirling, wondering how much you observed and how deep your knowledge really is. The saddest part is they will never fully know, because while they wasted their time attempting to undermine you, you stayed untouchable, calm, grounded, and in total control. Number 4, their lifestyles were noisy, but their deeds revealed the reality. A liar's words may be audible, but their silence will always reveal the truth. They believed they could gain power by telling stories, manipulating facts, and bending reality to match their illusion. They carefully prepared the appropriate wording and practiced their deceit, believing that if they talked confidently enough, you would believe them. But as they were talking, you were paying attention to what they didn't see rather than what they said. Words are simple to influence, but the body, the slightest shift in expression, the pause before responding, the way their hands twitched when they believed they had you tricked, that's where the truth resided. They had no idea that every false grin, fast glance, and artificial pause revealed them more than anything they ever said. They assumed they had complete control over the story, but you were never deceived by words. You read between the lines, and what you discovered was obvious. They believed they were lords of perception, that their words were weapons that could shape how you perceive them, but you never needed their words to realize the reality. You studied their motions and noticed the fissures. They worked so hard to seal, and you could see right through the act. Every attempt they made to manage the topic exposed more of what they were trying to conceal. And now that they've realized this, terror is crawling up their spine. The realization that they had never truly held the upper hand. Because you were constantly watching, they are now questioning every encounter and situation. They believe they had control. They wonder how much you saw. How long have you known? And what is the answer? Since the beginning, what they believed was their strength, the capacity to manipulate, twist words, and create illusions, turned out to be their biggest vulnerability. Because they had no idea you were not purchasing the show when they were playing. You were not reacting. You were not engaging. You were observing. And now, as they bear the weight of their own exposure, they feel it. The game was never in their hands. It was in their body language. They made errors, their unconscious tells, and you caught them all. Number 5, you utilized quiet as a weapon, and it shattered their strategy. Lions do not waste their roar on lambs. Silence is not a weakness. This is the ultimate checkmate. They baited you, poked you, and did all they could to get you to play their little game. But instead of catching the bait, you remained still. You let quiet speak for you. In the hush, it became the thing they dreaded most. They believed their words held power, that their manipulation may unsettle you. They wanted to watch you react, become enraged, and lose control. But when none of that happened and all they got was quiet, deliberate silence, the weight of it destroyed them because they had to sit with their own thoughts, anxieties, and anxiety. And that's when the unraveling started. See, stillness is never empty. It compels the other individual to occupy the space completely. They did. They caused their own chaos. Second-guessing every decision spirals them into their own mental games, trying to figure out what you knew and were planned. They panicked a bit more with each instant you did not react. Every time they pushed and received nothing, they lost another ounce of confidence. They believed they were in charge. The fact, however, is that they never had control. It was yours the entire time, without your involvement. Their small ideas fail, leaving them sad. They make so-called power movements. They lost their weight. They required your energy to maintain their image of control. You refused to provide it. They believed they were inside your thoughts, but your stillness became a ghost that plagued them. Now they sit there, vulnerable, realizing too late that they were never in control of the game. You were, whilst others spent their time running in circles. You stood still, observing, learning, and waiting. And now, they now know. They sense the impact of your silence. It's like a noose around their confidence. They reflect on every time when they believed they had you, only to learn you were only allowing them to dig their own tomb. Let them feel it. Allow them to sit with it. Because the stillness they once derided is now what keeps them up at night. 6. Their so-called power tactics were really desperate ego stunts. A fool's concept of power is making people notice them. A real force need no audience. They believed they were making planned movements, playing a high-stakes game in which they were always one step ahead. Every insult, each maneuver, an attempt to throw you off. These were not tactics. They were pleas for attention, desperation disguised as arrogance. They wanted you to respond, to recognize their so-called power, and to play along. But you never did because genuine power does not demand to be seen. They thought they were playing chess, but in reality they were only moving pieces about a board that didn't matter. Their power movements were not acts of domination. They were performances, flimsy acts designed to persuade both you and them that they were in charge. But you could see the fissures from the outset. Every action they made followed the same pattern of a frail ego attempting to assert its might. The subtle barbs, the phony confidence, the deceptive shows of superiority. It was all a mask, although a flimsy one. They were not powerful. They were simply terrified. They were afraid that without their tricks and games, they would be nothing. And now they realized the truth. You were never stuck in that game. You were watching it. They perceived your quiet as weakness. They assumed they had control since you refused to participate. But in truth, you were allowing them to expose themselves, allowing them to run in circles, exhausting themselves with their own idiocy. The more they sought to demonstrate their power, the less of it they truly possessed. And now, they can now feel it. That sickening realization that they weren't the masterminds they assumed they were. That everything they did was predictable and apparent. And underneath you, they reflect on all of their little power moves and realize that they were never truly powerful. It was simply ego begging for approval. And that's what hurts most. Not only did they lose, but they never actually played. You did not merely beat them. You allowed them to ruin themselves. Number 7, they sought affirmation. You deprived them of it. Nothing crushes the insecure more than being ignored by the person they want to impress. They needed you not for who you were, but for what you could provide them. Validation. Every move they made, every insult, and every act of one-upmanship was a frantic attempt to elicit a response from you. They wanted to feel strong, to be noticed, and to know they were important in your sight. But you offered them nothing. That is what devastated them the most. Not anger, not in revenge. Silence. The type that communicates louder than words ever could. They thrived on attention. However, when it came to you, they encountered a brick wall. There is no approbation, praise, or annoyance. You refused to feed their egos. And without your vitality to keep them going, they began to wither. They believed they had control over you, but they had no idea that your participation was critical to the success of their entire game. Without your answer, their small successes seemed empty. They played mind games, tried manipulation, and executed power tactics. It all went flat because you didn't participate. At first, they were perplexed. They pushed harder, used new strategies, and provided more bait in the hopes that you would react. But nothing worked. They were used to influencing people via validation, forcing individuals to play their game by making them seek approval. But you were different. You were not playing. And then it struck them hard. Without your appreciation, they started to feel tiny. The power they believed they possessed. It was never genuine. It just existed for as long as you allowed it. Now, when they reflect, they realize how much they relied on you to feel significant. The hurt they feel today is the weight of irrelevance. This is the fundamental significance of being selected. When you recognize that your validation is a money, you can decide who receives it. And when you refuse to give it to those who need it most, they fall beneath the strain of their own insecurities. Let them feel silly. Allow them to dwell in the void they made for themselves. Because while they were pursuing your approval, you were busy rising above them. Number 8, they believed they were unpredictable. You read them like a screenplay. A snake that goes in circles thinks it is unpredictable, but the hunter observing from above notices the pattern every time. They assumed you were second-guessing and straining to figure them out, lost in their ostensibly sophisticated strategies. Every time they made a move, they believed it would surprise, shake, or leave you guessing. What they didn't understand was that you had already read them like a book, with missing pages that were predictable, repetitious, and simple to follow. They believed they were the masterminds, pulling the strings and making every circumstance work in their advantage. However, their deeds were not the product of brilliance. They were the habits of a frantic mind caught in a loop. You saw it. You saw it play out time and over, because they were nothing more than captives of their own habits, their attempts to manipulate, control, and shift the balance in their favor. Everything was so plain to you, not because they didn't strive hard enough, but because they never had a unique idea in the first place. They were creatures of habit, propelled by ego, uneasy certainty, and an unwavering need to demonstrate authority. That's why they were never a legitimate danger. You knew what they were going to do before they even thought about it. Their games, the same stale tricks were repeated time and again. They tell falsehoods. They were so predictable, you could nearly memorize them before they said anything. They considered themselves as unexpected and elusive. You saw a trend that never altered. And now, they now know. They now know they were not outwitting you. They were simply marching in circles. The illusion crumbles the instant they realize you've known every move they've ever made. They aren't complicated. They're not ahead of the game. They were pawns who had no understanding of the game board. They are experiencing it now. The embarrassment, guilt, and weight of learning that the person they believed they were deceiving had been 2 steps ahead all along. They assumed they were playing mind games with you. But in the end, they were just playing themselves. Number 9. Their drama was a trap, but you didn't take the bait. When you failed to react, you deprived them of their one weapon. Pay attention. They came at you with everything they had. Manipulation, gaslighting, fabricated outbursts, and frantic attempts to get inside your brain. They twisted circumstances, pushed buttons, and played mental games, all with the objective of eliciting a reaction from you so that they could feel in charge. But you never gave them that gratification. You did not argue. You did not defend yourself. You did not play their game. That devastated them. Drama thrives on attention. Chaos needs fuel. And when you refuse to participate, you starve their strategies until they collapse under their own weight. They believed they were being smart, but all they revealed was their own desperation. Because the truth is just shaky. People thrive on turmoil to feel empowered. Only insecure brains need to cause uncertainty to feel in control. They expected you to race after their approval, battle to clear your name, and crumble under pressure, but instead you stayed motionless as they spun. And the more they attempted to bait you, the more dumb they appeared. You become the mirror that reflected their own vulnerability. And now, reality has struck them hard. They know you were never the one to lose control. They were. They were so concentrated on luring you into their web that they never noticed themselves being entangled in their own strings. Every ploy, Every strategy they devised flopped. When you declined to react, what they saw as a power play became their own public humiliation. They thought they were controlling the issue, but they instead exposed themselves. And now they are left wondering why it didn't work. It did not work because you never required their approval. You never needed their praise, acceptance, or distorted perception of reality. You understood the truth, and it stood on its own. Allow them to suffer the consequences of their failure. Allow them to dwell in the stillness they never imagined. They now see it plainly. Without your energy, they are nothing. Number 10. They engaged in superficial mental games. You functioned at a deeper level. A profound intellect frightens the shallow because no matter how hard they try, they will always be out of their element. They believe they understood you. You were simply another person manipulating another pawn to advance in their little game. They utilized their usual methods, mind games, deceit, and superficial plays, believing they could dominate you just as they controlled everyone else. But what they didn't know was that you weren't even playing the same game. While they skimmed the surface, thinking their rapid maneuvers were brilliant, you were already functioning on a completely new level, one they never considered. They were so focused on deceiving you that they never considered how deep your comprehension went. They can now see the truth plainly. They never had a chance. Their plans were simple, and their schemes predictable. Their hubris is hilarious. They were playing checkers while you were mastering an unending game. Every sophisticated strategy they devised was only a frantic attempt to conceal their own insecurities. And now they recognize it for what it is. You weren't simply dodging their tricks. You were dissecting them. You could see through every phony grin, subtle insult, and attempt to dominate the narrative before they ever said anything. They believed they could cage you into their limited knowledge, but you were the storm they didn't see coming. The hardest pill for them to take was the knowledge that they were not as intelligent as they imagined. They cultivated an image of themselves as calculating, strategic, and ahead of the curve, only to discover that their so-called expertise was nothing more than a compilation of repeated, superficial, and obvious maneuvers. Now, standing amid the ruins of their failed endeavors, they are embarrassed, exposed, and humiliated. The difference between superficial minds and deep profundity is evident. They finally comprehend. They were never engaging with somebody on their level. Allow them to process their discovery. Allow them to drown in their own silliness, for at the end of the day, they never understood you. And now it is too late for them to catch up. Number 11. Now they're wondering how much you knew all along. Nothing scares the deceiver more than the prospect of being genuinely seen. The moment they realize you've always known everything, and it's like a surprise punch. They lost their confidence. The arrogant sense of power was broken, because they're no longer only humiliated. They are afraid. They believe they were smart, that they had created the ideal disguise, spinning stories, twisting narratives, and gliding into shadows like puppeteers. However, they now discover they were never concealed. Their techniques, deceit, and cunning manipulations. You saw through everything. The worst part is that you didn't even have to say anything. Now the paranoia sets in. They begin repeating every speech, action, and strategy. What else did you see? How much did you know? When did you figure it out? The questions gnaw away at them, because the truth isn't only what you knew. It is something you have always known. They believed they were pulling strings, shaping narratives, and laying traps. But now they see the larger picture. You were entirely alert while watching silent patient. And this is what scares them the most. Because if you knew all along, that means every lie they said, trick they pulled, and phony grin they threw at you, it was all useless. This is much more than simply exposing their deceit. It is about the aftermath. Paranoia seeps in. Self-doubt takes hold. They begin second-guessing everything they have ever said. I'm wondering where they slipped up, where their facade crumbled. Their confidence has transformed into terror. They're caught in their own minds, drowning in the awareness that they never had control over the game. Here's the ultimate blow. There is no way out, since once someone recognizes they have been thoroughly seen, there is no way to reverse it. There is no way to change history. They are left standing in the ruins of their own life, realizing that the power they believe they possessed has vanished. Number 12. They overanalyzed everything, yet you moved with natural accuracy. The brightest intellect does not calculate every step. It is the one who just sees the truth and takes action. They believe that control came from strategy, from planning every step, from stressing over every conceivable conclusion. They believed that if they plotted, schemed, and overanalyzed enough, they would be able to get an advantage. However, all of their reasoning just kept them locked in their own turmoil. Meanwhile, you did not need to plan every single step. You did not need to expend energy on endless computations. You moved instinctively, clearly, and purposefully, always 2 steps ahead without even attempting. That's what scares them. They spent all of their time manipulating reality, twisting it to their advantage, and forcing a result. But no matter how much they planned, they couldn't shake you. They couldn't throw you off, since your strength is not derived from playing their game. It comes from looking through it. You were not entangled in their mess. You stood outside of it, watching them stumble over their own fantasies. They imagined they were playing mental chess, meticulously positioning their pieces and planning 10 stages ahead. But they never realized that true expertise isn't achieved by agonizing over every detail. It's about understanding when the game itself isn't important. You were not trapped in their web. You were not distracted by their loudness. You just moved with purpose, clarity, and a strong sense of direction. And now they find themselves looking at their own ruin, overthinking. Their so-called smart tactics crumbled before their own weight. Every meticulously crafted plot exposes. Every attempt to control you. Pointless. You were never under their power to begin with. You were always free. You were always ahead. Now they sit in quiet, recognizing how silly they were to think they had the upper hand. They assumed they were calculating your every move. But the fact is that they were merely responding to you the entire time, while trying to keep up with their own uncertainty. You moved with easy accuracy. Their mental games were hardly complex. Their tricks were not clever. Their control was never genuine. Let them feel it. Allow them to bear the consequences of their failure. Because in the end, it was not their designs that prevailed. It was your lucidity. And they now realize you weren't just playing along. You were always ahead. And now, once the dust settled, the truth is apparent. They never had control. Every move they took, every trick they attempted simply drove them more into the fantasy they had built for themselves. Meanwhile, you stood steadfast and unshaken, always 2 steps ahead. Allow them to bear the consequences of their own ignorance. Allow them to question how much you knew all along. If this connected with you, please like it. Subscribe to our channel.